Welcome to Season 2 with the Market Mystics, where we discuss and redefine markets, wealth, and trading on Earth as it is in heaven. Join us on the journey while we consider new possibilities with special guests who might just challenge a few perspectives. Get ready to dive in deep with your hosts, Joshua and Kim.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We have, I think, what will be a great conversation planned for today. I say this having just had 7 different great conversations about 7 different topics.
Yeah, this is true. We hopped on to have to work through a couple different things, and we just started talking about this and talking about that, and it was like, okay, let's get to the topic at hand now. But that was really good, and it was all really connected to what we want to talk about today, because I would say at the root of it, our conversation has been how to find unity within yourself, and just kind of the little processes that both of us have experienced and learned, and what that really looks like. And so one of the things, the title is Clear Conscience, because we were talking about the importance of having a clear, balanced conscience when you're going through things. So kind of the root of this conversation, it really started after we recorded a previous episode a few weeks ago with Dr. Farney. And after we recorded, we were sort of talking about the sacrificial system in the Bible and Jesus's sacrifice on the cross, and what that did, and some of the reasons for it, and maybe not holistically covered the topic, but just I think this was a piece of it. And it was really there was something in us that was oh, this isn't quite balanced. So I messed up. I need to do something. And so Kim and I were talking about sometimes you have a conversation with someone and you leave it and you feel unsettled, oh, I think I offended them, or I said something hurtful or whatever it is. And having that, you feel the unjustness in you, and you're oh, I need to call them. I need to straighten this out. I need to balance myself.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe sometimes they felt similarly, and maybe it was just something in you. But we were talking about the importance of living that balance, that pure conscience, being able to have a clean conscience, a clear conscience about your life opens so many doors to the Spirit and to communicate with God. And you kind of were telling a story a minute ago about this practicing healing yourself by focusing on something and putting your full intention towards it. And I think that that's connected to having a clear conscience, because you were yeah, you had I was practicing and I needed to have this pure intention, but I don't think you can do that if you don't have a clear conscience inside of you. If you're unbalanced inside of you and you're oh, I messed up with my kid earlier, how are you going to be able to be wholly unified and focus on this other thing? And so I think about the Bible talks about not letting the sun set on if you're angry with somebody. And it makes me think about that. It's that there's something inside of you. There's this conscience inside of you that's calling out for justice, calling out for the scales to be balanced in your life. And the sacrificial system in the Old Testament and Yeshua's sacrifice in the New Testament, they help, or they do balance those scales. And so that was kind of just that's kind of an overview of the like topic at hand, was just the importance of having a clear conscience, what that means for your life. And we just kind of wanted to, I don't know, riff off of that a little bit.
For sure. I thought, and you brought this up earlier, but I completely agree. And it was such a profound statement. I thought Bree had a really interesting take on it when we were talking with Dr. Farney after we recorded that day. And I'm not going to quote it or give it justice, I feel like. But I don't know, Josh, maybe you could summarize this a bit better than what would come out of my mouth.
I think the summarization would be, the sacrificial system was created for us because we had this like something in us crying out for justice.
Yes.
And so the sacrificial system was created so we could be balanced within ourselves.
And not necessarily to be balanced with God.
Right.
Right. So it is a system that was made for us to get balanced and feel like justice had been served.
Yeah. And that puts us back into proper alignment with God.
Right.
Not that he moved, but we did.
Right. But just that concept and playing into this conversation on conscience, I think it opens my mind a bit to look at it from a different angle. You know, people will kind of talk about your conscience, which, by the way, is different than consciousness. Right? Conscience is like that unspoken feeling, or sometimes it's an unsettled feeling, which is also kind of going back to what Dr. Farney was talking about in that episode as well. There's been a wild flow that's been going on with some of these topics. It is just, the synchronicity is off the chain right now. I don't know. It's wild. But when we talk about that, and even the sacrificial system to clear our conscience, because there is some sort of scale of justice that we need to have balanced within us, I do find it really interesting, because just like you were talking, you're given this example of, maybe you have a conversation with somebody and then you leave and you feel like something's out of balance, something like maybe other people don't get it. I get this like little nagging, like in my gut, like something was off. I left that, and I think I might have done something off that might have set the wrong trajectory, or I might have offended someone. I might have hurt someone. Not like intentionally. I don't operate that way, but it still happens sometimes. And then it's like, there must be something done to set this right. That's how it happens in me. I tend to operate with fairly clear conscience. I mean, I would have never said that before this conversation because I don't think about it. But then when something's off, I immediately know it, and I have to write that. Like, something has to be done for this to get me back to even. Which a few weeks ago, we were talking about the sacrificial system and the need for it, and the presence of it still it's still around. And this is just kind of taking it to a different level. And I suppose I never really thought about it being really to just balance oneself so that you can still be in alignment with the Lord, and not being him telling you have to do this.
Right. Well, and it was so detailed in the Old Testament. I mean, it was like they had measured everything that it took to be balanced. Like, did you steal from your brother? Okay, that's 2 pigeons. Like, did you do, whatever? Okay, that's a goat. Like, they had this process of like, we understand what it takes to balance this scale. And I think really what Yeshua did was offer the sacrifice that gives us the ability to balance everything. And you could argue that he did balance everything already, but if you don't apply that to the unjust or the unbalanced scale when your conscience isn't clean, then you're just, I would say, it's not that he didn't pay for it, but you're not accepting the payment of it.
Right.
And and that doesn't mean like you can go do whatever you want and then balance the scale and not like, sometimes like Kim's talking about, if you're having a conversation, you're like have an unsettled feeling with it, maybe you need to talk to that person and not just go pray about it. Like, there is things with that. I think it's really interesting. You were talking about how everything's been flowing lately. And I heard someone recently say, like, when all the ducks are lining up, you're in grace and you're in, like, you have like this clear conscience about the direction you're going. And so it's like you're driving down the road and all the stoplights turn green, and the parking space opens up right when you pull in, and like these things happen. You're trying to turn left across the lanes, or turn right for our South African listeners. Um, you're doing these things, and all of a sudden the traffic opens up, and you can make your turn, or you can find your parking spot, or whatever. Like doing that, recognizing, oh, I'm in the flow because things are working for me, because that's how creation was made, was to work for you. But when we get it out of balance, we put ourselves under the law.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when things stop working for you. And so this person was just proposing the idea of like, pay attention to what's going on in your life. Are things flowing for you, or are things not? If things aren't flowing for you, that means somewhere inside yourself you're out of balance. You need to find where you're out of balance. And once you get that, once you apply the payment to bring the balance there, you'll start to find the flow again. And so it was kind of just like this back and forth of like grace and law, and grace and law, of like recognizing, am I in the grace? Am I in the flow? Am I in the law? Am I out of the flow? And I thought that was really an intriguing thing, because both of us have been noticing this flow. Like with everything leading up to my wedding, like I'm noticing all these different things that are flowing, things just lining up, things that are doing this. And it's like, this episode is during my honeymoon, and my honeymoon was a really intriguing thing because so many things about the ceremony of my wedding just flowed perfectly. But the honeymoon didn't for a little while. Like at one point we're like, okay, we're going to go to this location on our honeymoon, and we bought plane tickets, and then we couldn't find a hotel. And it was like, well, why is this not flowing? Like, what's going on with this? And we ended up canceling the plane tickets and going to a completely different location, because all of a sudden we looked at that and it was like, both of us were like, wow, that's amazing. That's like, that Airbnb is like on sale for some reason, and it's right in a location we want to be, and there's these activities that we enjoy doing right beside it, and it's like, oh, we just found the flow again. And I think that that's such a fun thing to pay attention to in your life, because I think sometimes we get so in our head, or I don't exactly know what the right word is, like not tuned in, that we don't even notice that we're not in the flow, or that we are in the flow. And I think that's an important thing to pay attention to.
I agree. I have so many things. I have so many directions I could go with this. But I think what I'm settling on for the moment is the concept of the law and the justice system as like societal ones, right? But if you look back in the Bible and scripture, they gave these prescriptions for, well, if this has happened, then you sacrifice this much and it will make it even again. And it essentially, that is what implemented law, right? But also, as we're talking about it, it makes me think about this also introduces the concept of non-self-governance. And I actually think that if you are in a mature place, you should be able to, and hopefully you are learning to govern yourself in these ways. So yes, when you offend somebody, you can go realize it, take that gut check, that's what I would call it, because that's where I feel it, and go back and make it right and get back to even, right? But then things were implemented, well, an eye for an eye, right? Those things to even the scales. But do we actually have the capability of doing that ourselves? And I would argue to say yes. And I think that because in the past, there have been those who can't do it. This is why we have a legal system. This is why we have a justice system, because if you're not going to govern yourself, then you will be governed to still even things out, which even going back to Yeshua and his sacrifice, I find it really interesting if we look at it from this angle, that he knows there's a conscience. He knows that things have been done and not atoned for humanity, right? And is it possible that his sacrifice was to even those scales again so that we could move forward and be aligned in the flow and start to see things happen again? You know what I mean? And kind of get us out of our own way. Because again, if we're looking at this from the way that it was kind of proposed the other day as this justice system for our sake, not for the sake of God, right? Like not something he has implemented, but something that we feel like we need to atone for, right? I find all of that connecting being really interesting, and the concept of self-governance or corporate governance.
Right.
And what happens when we start taking responsibility for ourselves and our own conscientious conscientiously. Can I make up a word right now? Can I do that? Conscience. I know there are people listening going like, geez, Kim, how do you not know language? Okay, but
just learning English.
All right, kind of. But if we're talking about that, what if in an ideal world, we all started retaking that, and not in a huge sacrificial way, even though sometimes that's kind of what you need to do. And it all depends on you. I think it's a very personal and individualized thing. But also what happens when you can start operating with a clear conscience because you have your scales evened out, balanced. And then you are connected with other people who are also self-governing and balancing their own scales. And then you have a clear path ahead of you, and you're not hitting all the potholes and the roadblocks and all of the things. And you start moving forward, whether the same purpose or not. And then you start seeing things really start to happen. And you start seeing this flow, right? And you start not stepping outside of the flow so often. And then all of a sudden you're connected with all these people. Like, this is what happened to me. I had a meeting with someone I'd never met with before. I'd met him before, but I'd never had a meeting with him before. And all of the things that I've been talking about this week and that have been coming up, we had in this conversation as well, and I didn't bring it up. And those are the kinds of things that blow my mind, you know, because they're not connected to the other people that I'm talking with. It is completely independent, and it's still flowing there too. So what if we got our consciences clear and we started flowing regardless of where we were? And we started being able to focus on that because we didn't have things in the way, taking our mindset or our emotional state or our spiritual state or whatever kind of off focus. This goes back to what you were talking about that I was talking about earlier. I have had this, I don't know, I discovered this 15 or 20 years ago. And this was before I was really flowing in any kind of spiritual stuff. I would say I was saved, but I wasn't like practicing or anything. But I found that if I had a pain somewhere, like say a headache, I have a headache right now. This is why we were talking about it. If I can focus, if I can just sit down and focus on it, like really focus all of my attention, all of my thoughts, all of my body, all of my intention, all of everything. If I focus really, really hard on that pain, I can get to a place where it goes away. Like, I don't know how it happens, but it is like this intense focus. And if I can maintain that focus, it will stay gone. But if I then get distracted, it may come back. But what if we like apply that concept to like a broader thing, right? So what if we're all walking around in the clear conscience, in the flow, being able to focus on whatever it is that we're supposed to focus on, and then we really start seeing things happen? What if that happens?
What if it happens? Yeah, I think that's amazing, and I think the opportunity for that is amazing. One thing that came to mind while you were talking is what we're not talking about is beating yourself up
Oh, that's
for
true.
what you did.
Self-condemnation. That's not it.
Right. That's not what we're talking about. Um and I think it's kind of this like it's kind of nuanced sometimes. Like to recognize that you're out of balance, but not punishing yourself, but going and fixing the unbalanced.
Making it
Whether
right.
it's whether it's going to the person to deal with the unbalanced, or whether it's going to the cross and applying the blood to it, or whatever the reason may be, or whatever you need to do to balance it. It's not this like beating yourself up to balance yourself. And the reason that came to mind is I had an experience, I don't know, a month or two ago, where I was with my fiance and I did something and like a little bit reckless and physically caused some pain to her. And instantly my mind was like, I'm out of balance. We messed up. Like I did not do this was wrong. And I was like, I need to fix it. But I couldn't make her feel better. I could apologize. And I found myself looking like not physically beating myself up, but like mentally beating myself up. Like, why did you do that? Why, like, what were you thinking? Blah, blah, blah. And I realized oh, like I have this need for justice in me. And I'm not accepting what Jesus did. And so I'm trying to punish myself to make up for it. What I needed to do was go to her, be vulnerable, apologize, open myself and say, I'm like, sorry, this happened this way. Um, and go to the cross and, you know, like apply that to that situation. And maybe like she still would have been in some physical pain and maybe she would have been irritated with me, but like that could have been a more simple way of dealing with it rather than, I spent hours just sitting there beating myself up for what I did. And it was like, yeah, I did something wrong, but it wasn't the end of the world. Like it wasn't that big of a deal. Um, and I just think that it's an important thing to pay attention to, is that we aren't talking about beating yourself up. Like
Right.
there is a better way to do that. Um, it's not balancing the scales for yourself. The payment for the scales has already been paid. It's just about learning how to apply that between you and the person that you feel unbalanced with. And I think this is another thought, is like the most important place to balance first is within yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, go to your body, soul, spirit, and where do you feel unbalanced? Where do you feel that, oh, I haven't taken care of my body, or oh, I've not taken care of my soul, I have not taken care of my spirit? Like, where do you feel unbalanced, and work on that first. That would be my recommendation. And this is an interesting thought, because I heard somebody else say, and this is where I think kind of language is lacking a little bit. So I want to preface what I'm going to say with that I don't think it's perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the heart of what they're saying is true. But they said the communication tool of the body is the brain, communication tool of the soul is the mind, and the communication tool of the spirit is the conscience.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes if you're not tuned into yourself, if you're out of balance with yourself, it's real hard to tell the difference between those. And that's part of this journey, is like becoming a safe place within yourself, to where you can start to tell a difference between what's talking, where it's coming from, because none of these things speak English. Like, you're not hearing this audible voice of your conscience telling you, you messed up, now you need to go talk to this person. Like, you're just getting this impression or this
Mm-hmm.
thought or something. And that's, learning to pay attention to that, and learning to pay attention to where that's coming from, because there's like, your body is constantly communicating with you.
Right.
And I think it's part of this journey of being connected with yourself, that you learn how to trust this piece of yourself, and to distinguish this piece of yourself.
Very true. I think that's good. And I think it's really important that you pointed that out, because it can't be about punishing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're going to tip the scales in another way. Like your waveform, instead of being like kind of gentle waves, it's going to be like freaking tsunamis and earthquakes,
Right.
And that can be destructive in itself. So if I could add on anything to that, I would say also remember to love yourself and be kind.
Exactly.
It really is important, regardless of what you're doing in whatever area. Like, it really is important to be kind to yourself.
Yeah. I think that's incredible advice. I don't remember the exact scientist or whoever that said this, but I just saw someone recently was talking about the study of simply being kind to yourself, and how, like, sometimes that's the catalyst to create this massive change within yourself, is just being kind to yourself.
It's true. I also need to practice this. I say things. Sometimes things come out of my mouth. I'm like, oh, Kim, that was good. I really need to do that.
Yeah, it's important.
Yep. Okay. Well, good stuff today, Josh.
Yeah. I want to end it with one phrase. I posted this on my Facebook a few weeks ago, but this phrase really jumped out, or this sentence really jumped out at me, and I think it's really important. It says, explore your heart, because in it is life.
Love it.
Me too. Maybe it's something I need, because it's just like, every time I hear it, I'm just like, oh yeah, I need that. Oh yeah, there's life in me. There's good things in me.
Mm-hmm. It's good. Okay. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for sticking around. Listen for new episodes every Monday and Thursday. Find us on all social media platforms by searching for Market Mystics. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. Visit upperroomcd.com, where you can find more information about the hosts, projects, and guests. Go deeper by booking a coaching appointment focused on redefining identity and wealth in your life. See you next time.